Welcome to Conversations on Healthcare. This week's guest is virus scientist and entrepreneur Dr. William Haseltine on the Omicron variant, efficacy of boosters, and what lies ahead for this shape-shifting virus. Now, here's Mark Masselli and Margaret Flinter.
Pills to treat COVID-19, they sound like an important part of the solution to dealing with the pandemic, but a warning from our guest is attracting a lot of attention and controversy. You'll hear him explain in his own words why he's concerned about a new drug which could, and I emphasize could, have led to the Omicron variant.
Dr. William Haseltine is at the forefront of medical research and application. He's taught at Harvard Medical School. He designed the strategy to develop the first treatment for HIV/AIDS. He's well known for his groundbreaking work on cancer. He led the team that pioneered the development of new drugs based on the human genome information, and now serves as president of Access Health International. That's a nonprofit think tank and advisory group dedicated to improving access to high quality, affordable care. And Dr. Haseltine, we can't think of a better person to have with us today for this show. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
you're welcome, and thank you for that.
Yeah, and really welcome back to Conversations on Healthcare. And you know, the FDA has yet to authorize use of Merck's Malnupiravir, an antiviral medication for COVID patients. And you have some pointed thoughts about that. I'm wondering if you could share that with our listeners.
Well, the first thing is we do need drugs, both to prevent and to treat COVID. Now that we know that there are variants that blast through almost all vaccines, including people who've been infected and then vaccinated, it's looking a little bit more like HIV, which is very hard to vaccinate against, at least permanently. Now, there is, of course, the hope that the vaccines will protect you, at least for some time, from serious disease or death. That's really good news. Even if you get the virus, maybe it won't be as bad for you. And it's a very good reason to get vaccinated. But we have to add new tools to our armamentarium. And just as we realized, once we knew that it would be hard to vaccinate against HIV, we developed a whole series of drugs. Now, this virus is a little bit different in the sense that when you get HIV, you have many years to treat before somebody has bad effects. Here, once you feel the first symptoms, you may have 3 days to treat. That's the window for the Pfizer drug.
Right.
Now, you've asked me about another drug called Malnupiravir that Merck has pushed as a treatment. I have very grave concerns that have been shared for many years about this drug. This is not a new drug. It's been around since the 80s. And a lot of people had looked at it and dropped it because it has some unfortunate potentials. How does this drug work? It actually causes the virus to mutate itself to death. What it does, it's a mutagen. Mutagen means it creates mutations. It doesn't sound just on the surface of it. You want to speed up this virus's ability to make mutations. It sounds like a really bad idea. And when you look at what happens in tissue culture with other coronaviruses, including the MERS, it's just the viruses that come out of treatment with Malnupiravir are highly mutated. Sometimes they have over 100 mutations in them. It's just, and so we know that if you treat somebody with Malnupiravir, for a few days, they shed virus. Those viruses are going to be mutant. And I am very worried that that drug not only is not particularly effective, about 30% effective at this point, if you take it early, but has potential to significantly accelerate the rate of variation of this virus and therefore the pandemic. That's not 100% certain. Mm-hmm. France has taken these cautions. Its lack of good efficacy, the fact that it may cause mutations that will be very difficult for especially pregnant women and others, and the possibility that it could make the pandemic worse, mm-hmm. to not allow the drug to be used. As far as I know, the only country that's not approved it for use. They even canceled their order. This, as I say, this drug was considered to be too dangerous to use for biopreparedness. It's not a good idea, in my opinion. I hope that the US FDA reaches the same conclusion.
Yeah. So Dr. Haseltine, clarify for me, we've been following this because as you probably know, this is one medication that's being made available throughout the country on a preliminary basis anyway for use. And we've all certainly been excited to think that there have been opportunities to identify people at risk who are positive early on, treat to reduce the burden of symptoms, and hopefully prevent progression to hospitalization or even death. So this is an incredibly important issue. My understanding, and I think you may have just said this, but I want to make sure I heard it correctly, that we have not yet gotten emergency use authorization for this drug in the United States. Am I correct on that?
You're correct. The FDA is, and the committee was divided. It was an unusual, I think, 13-10 decision.
Right.
And some of the scientists that were on that voiced exactly the same concerns I did. I have just given you. They have those concerns as well. So I think it's you can turn it down on efficacy. You can turn it down on danger to mutagenesis. But I am very concerned about exacerbating an already bad situation. We now know we're not at the end of virus variation. Omicron has put the end to those hopes. And so we don't want any more mutations than we have to put up with.
So this is more about the drug itself, less about where the clinical trial was held, which is South Africa. They had a couple of other locations I was doing it. It's the drug, not the location, or was there anything about the patient population that or any data that you looked at that might have also stirred your concern? Because it sounds like you have a historic concern on this drug, but anything that you saw in their documentation that gave rise to additional concern?
Well, first of all, it was tested around the world like you have to do if you want to move quickly. South Africa was one of the places. And it's not even sure Omicron originated in South Africa. It was first found there. But by the time it was found there, it was found in a lot of other places. We just didn't find it. But let me say, there is one additional concern. And that is that in their initial trial, going way back to October 2020, where they tried to use the drug to treat people who are already ill, not within the little window from symptom, the 3 to 5 day window. They failed the trial, but they did a dose escalation. That means they used a low dose. It doesn't really work so well. So the viruses that come out are going to keep coming, and they're going to be mutated. They used a low dose, a higher dose, and finally this dose. Now, for a drug, you've got to use dose escalation. But others who looked at this drug for biopreparedness decided it was too dangerous to use. Others who created research programs at private companies dropped the drug because they feared it was too dangerous to use. Why it has been put forward as a drug to treat perhaps tens or more millions of people is beyond my understanding.
Dr. Haseltine, I think the public, and even those of us who would consider ourselves reasonably well informed, not experts like yourself, but reasonably well informed, I think are getting a little whiplash about what is just really maybe the normal evaluation as knowledge becomes available, right? And this week, I think we heard about Janssen, right? That Janssen probably ought to be moved out of the list of vaccines for COVID. We haven't seen anything official yet, but certainly there is some good evidence about both complications and efficacy. And Politico, I think, raised in its reporting this week that the Biden administration is really frustrated about doctors and scientists going on Twitter and cable to criticize their moves and thinking that is confusing to the public. But it seems to me this goes exactly to what our experts have been saying, is that we need to get all the opinions out there so that people can hear the information, although we worry at the same time about misinformation. This is really hard for the public.
This is a very difficult situation for everybody. And I sympathize with the people in the Biden administration. They're very good people. They have the best intentions. But you know what I'm really sad about is we had a president who called this a hoax. We have a president who takes this really seriously and dedicates a good portion of his time and has excellent people around him. And we still can't seem to make the progress we need. Not because of the leadership, but because of our people. We are divided. We have all sorts of reasons. And the moment you politicize a health issue, you've done something that can be deadly dangerous to the population. And it's not even necessarily completely political. It is a very complicated situation. I think that Ed Young in The Atlantic today or yesterday wrote a very, very good article. We're not prepared for this as a people, as a country. And, and he's echoing something I've been saying now for some time. Until we realize that we are our brother's keeper, that what I do to protect myself and my family is to protect me and it's to protect you. And you've got to do the same thing. We're in deep trouble and we're nowhere near there. And right now, we're facing, even as I speak today, the virus over the next 2 days, the Omicron, is likely to double. And double after that. If you keep doubling 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, it takes you a week to 10 days to get everybody. And by the way, that's what's happened in Africa, and it's what's happening in UK right now. And it's what's happening right now. I just got a note from a friend on Twitter who said, I woke up and everybody I know is infected with COVID. That sounds funny, but it's not so funny because it's happened to me too. All of a sudden, people I know are calling me up and say, Bill, I just had a positive COVID test. And these are vaccinated, sometimes triply vaccinated people. Yeah. So this is a situation which is rapidly evolving. Well, now, let me take one message that has been given, which I have a question about why it came out of the White House, which is, oh, this is a more mild infection. I was suspicious of that. I looked at this virus. I couldn't, the sequence and its behavior, I couldn't see anything that suggested that it was more mild. And the recent papers that have just come out of the UK say we can't see any difference either. When we look at our patient population, although it's very tiny right now, it looks just the same or worse than Delta. Oh boy. So I wouldn't be reassured. So I think that it's really difficult, and I understand the difficulties of trying to give a coherent public message in a rapidly evolving situation. But just remember, when the same group, well-meaning, to get people vaccinated, that the vaccine will absolutely protect you. Well, it doesn't. And some of us said, let's be careful about that statement. Okay, are we to be put in the doghouse because we raise an important issue? Yeah. Because it doesn't conform to a public health message? It's true. Maybe it does confuse the public, but this is a confusing situation.
Well, that you raise
experts and non-experts.
You raise an interesting point that I do want to get into a little later about the sort of the battle that's going on in the private science community with the governmental science and what's happening there. But I do want to sort of pick up on your point. There's been spontaneous combustion because we've all had the same experience that everybody we know is all of a sudden calling us up and saying, hey, we've gotten this, which sort of goes to the question about Omicron and its effectiveness with the vaccines. When are we going to know whether or not the third shot, booster, third shot, whatever, is working, and whether Moderna or Pfizer is the best to take for that? I think people are really sort of lost. And then just how Omicron evades vaccine neutralization would be helpful. But talk a little bit about your sense of when we'll have some definitive word on what might be the best pathway for people in terms of vaccine protection.
Let me say, with respect to the third shot, we know the answer. It doesn't protect you for very long, maybe only 3 months, the third shot. And if you've been infected and had 2 doses of the Moderna or the Pfizer vaccine, it doesn't protect you longer than 3 months either. Maybe 4 months, and Moderna may be a shade better.
Right.
That's sort of, let's say 3.5 instead of 3 months. But when you look at the data that I've just seen, you get very little protection. So when Pfizer says something like, well, this 3 shots is significantly protective, it means it's 10-fold less, if you look at the data, protective than it was against Delta. It also, or against Wuhan, it also says after 3 months, you have virtually no protection. A few people may, but most people don't. So the answer is what to do. The answer is, which is test yourself very frequently so you know if you're infected. Get yourself a pulse oximeter so you know whether or not you have to go to the hospital. So if your oxygen level drops, you know you're in trouble. Hopefully it doesn't. And avoid crowds. Don't go to your Christmas party. Don't travel. Stay home. That's hard to say after all we've been through. But I would strongly advise against bars, restaurants, theaters, and parties. Let me give you an example of a friend. I went to my last party about 3 days ago. And I said, everybody, I'm not going to any more until Omicron is gone. I hope you will listen to me. One of my friends just wrote me, said, Bill, I wish I had listened. I went out and somebody I was with had Omicron. And now I'm isolated and I hope I don't get it. That's what I would recommend. It's hard to say. I know it's hard for people to do that. It's hard for businesses. This is the time when you fill up your money bag for the end of the year and get some cash that ties you over for January and February, which are terrible months for retail. But it's pretty dangerous right now, really dangerous.
Well, it is sobering, to put it mildly. And I guess the question is, and after living through this year, right? And this was the year when we had the vaccine, so we were very optimistic. We gave 800,000 vaccines across the state of Connecticut. Very optimistic that this was going to stop it. It feels like we're going to be back to what was very inflammatory in our society, which was lockdowns and mandatory quarantines and maybe school closings. What is your sense? Are you having an opportunity to weigh in with the policy people about whether these measures, which really come back to local people, right? Governors and mayors and superintendents of the Board of Education to impose, what's your sense of what's going to happen with those decisions, and are they necessary? Are they the right thing to do right now? You know, if you can't go to a bar, you probably shouldn't be going to your second grade class either.
Well, let me just say, we have a model to look at, which is the UK, which is not exactly like us, but close enough. They decided they would try to tough it out. And boy, do they have problems. And every day it gets worse. So in the past, our experience in most parts of our country have mimicked the UK experience. And it's not been a happy one. And it doesn't look like, to me, we're going to do the things we need because we don't have the consensus that we need in our population. I'm writing a new book now on multimodal COVID control. And the first thing I'm saying that we need is a consensus society. If you don't have that, it doesn't matter how good you are at everything else. We're the best in the world at communications and drug development and vaccine development. And has it done us any good? We have more people dead from this than anybody else in the world. More American. And we're only 5%. There are countries that are 5-10 times bigger than us. Maybe India rivals us. Okay, we're right there in the same boat with India. It is not a happy circumstance. And we think our health systems are better than India's, but the results aren't better. But what can we say? We can only hope that we wise up. But, you know, I was projecting for it. How many years, decades, or centuries is it going to take for us to get to a consensus society? How many more disasters? Will the coming infections, more like Omicron, bring us closer together or push us further apart?
You know, I want to pick up on that thread about the consensus society. I'm wondering within the scientific community, and I alluded to it earlier, these are your friends at CDC, at the White House, at NIH that you know, and yet we seem to have some difference of opinion going on, or their recommendations are not being listened to. What do you think is at the heart of simply the CDC not coming out and saying the third dose, the booster, whatever, should be mandated? Where's the disconnect that's happening?
I think it's a political disconnect, because one of the things this is teaching us, which is teaching us again, is that leaders cannot lead where they know we have to go. They can only lead where people will follow. FDR is a great example. I read a lot about FDR before World War II. By the late 30s, he knew we were going to be in that war. but the American people resisted, just dug in their heels. And you watch how he struggled and maneuvered and tried. He was a great leader of people, and he did everything he can. But until Pearl Harbor, he couldn't do very much.
Right.
Yeah.
That changed things. Omicron, I don't think is going to be our Pearl Harbor for this. There may be one which allows leaders to lead. A leader can walk down, but if you look behind you and nobody's there, you're in trouble. And I think that's the lesson between the two presidents. One who called it a hoax, one who takes it deadly seriously, and the results are about the same.
Well, that is
It's
a good
not
note.
them.
That is a good note, Dr. Haseltine, for us to wrap up on. We know you have a time deadline. We've been speaking with Dr. William Haseltine, a virologist, the author of 2 books about COVID. And as you just heard, somebody with a strong and clear message about COVID variants, antiviral drugs, and what we might expect going into the new year. You can learn more about him at www.williamhaseltine.com. Dr. Haseltine, thank you so much for joining us again on Conversations on Healthcare.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no, it's a
Happy New Year. And take care.
Happy New Year to you, though the 3.5 months is a little sobering of going into the new year about the efficacy, but we will we really appreciate your time.
Absolutely. Best wishes to you. We'll look forward to a future conversation to see how this all worked out.
Take care.